Hi, welcome to videos. Today I'm going to show some lessons and talk about this book, Arpeggio Alchemy. I'll kind of give an overview of its pros and cons, and I'll zero in and talk about and show some specific exercises and then some applications or licks inspired by those applications. So those will be able to download on my Patreon page. It'll be that page, and the link is in the description. You don't have to be a member. So let me give you a little bit of a preview, and then I'll start getting into some of the concepts and different things in the book. So this is one of the exercises from the book, and there's like 200 exercises in this book and licks, so just a ton of things to work on, but here's one of them. So basically this is taking the three minor arpeggios from the key of C major, A minor, D minor, and E minor, not counting the minor flat 5, and they're stacking it in fourths. So you're starting on the E, A, D. Now here's a lick that I wrote kind of inspired by that. I still have that same stack of three arpeggios, but then I take and start with the D minor and end with the A minor. Okay, so again, same arpeggios. That's my take on how you might actually use it in a lick. You can use your own thing. That's kind of the thing on this. It's meant to inspire you and get you moving on a path. Don, in an interview I saw, said that he doesn't want you learning just to try and memorize the 200 examples in here. He wants you to take a few of them and some of the concepts and make them your own. That, he said that really what holds people back isn't them needing to know more theory, knowing more fingerings. It's usually not knowing how to apply what they actually know already. So that's why I kind of am going to not just teach some extras, but show some of my ideas and how I might use them too in this video. Now, if you don't know who Don Mach is, most people don't, but he's had a huge influence on guitar in general on it, and I'll explain why. And he unfortunately died earlier this year, so condolences to anyone who knew him. He died from cancer not that long after this book came out. But this book really does feel like a accumulated knowledge of a lifetime of teaching and playing. The reason he was so influential, he was brought in at Musicians Institute, or G.I.T. The very first year it opened. Howard Roberts brought him in along with a couple other instructors, so he helped shape and create curriculum for that school, which then put out many famous players. I personally went there in 86, 87. He had stopped teaching there full time at that time, so I never had him as a teacher, but they were still using some of his curriculum when I went there. He also directed almost all of their 300 videos that they'd put out, and the instructional videos, and then he went on to direct for REH and Alfred's company, the artist series that included players like John Petrucci, Steve Morris, Alan Holdsworth, Joe Pass, Yngwie Malmsteen, Al Di Meola, Frank Gabali, Paul Gilbert, just a who's who of guitar players from the late 80s and 90s. He was producer and director on all those videos that came out that I just mentioned, and many more. So he's had an influence on a lot of people. He also put out dozens of books before this. Anyways, so the pros and cons of this book. It really covers, one thing I like is it really gets into how to apply this stuff and not just here's a bunch of fingerings. And it also gets into some of the background things you might need to know. He talks about stuff like chord substitution. He talks about what chords are in a key, how to look at a chord progression to determine what key it's in. All these things that will help you when you're improvising with those arpeggios, but most arpeggio books don't bring up. The downside of this is it's definitely kind of aimed at players who have some knowledge already of theory and arpeggios. If you don't know what intervals are, I'll link up there. Definitely check out my video on that. Other things that would help you is understanding keys, understanding what chords are in a key. He does go over that to some degree in here. But some of that basic knowledge, notes on the neck, would definitely help you when you're coming into this. If you don't know how to read key signatures, check out Circle Fifths and things like that, because he plays the examples not just in like C and G and some of the most common ones, but I counted at least 9 different keys that he plays in. So everything from C to 4 sharps or to 4 flats around the circle. So 9 different keys. But you can always transpose, and I recommend you, if you're learning something in a key that you're not that comfortable with, is bring it back into keys you know best. That way you can relate it to the other things you already know. If you look at, just randomly open to pages, everything is tabbed out with both standard music and the tab. There's a lot of written information too, covering different concepts and such. So let's jump into some of these ideas. So right in the beginning of the book, it says Master Art of Arpeggio Superimposition for Guitar. What he means by that is when you're the superimposition of it, basically refers to taking simple chords or arpeggios and then superimposing them over top of a chord progression or a bass line to create a more complex harmony. For example, same thing like a choir would do. Choir people aren't singing chords, they're singing individual notes, so when combined together it gives the sound of a chord. So if, for example, I'm playing an A minor 7 arpeggio and then I play an E minor 7, which is starting from the 5th of the A minor, on that has two notes in common, but it also adds in what would be the 9 and 11 if I'm thinking of it all in relation to A minor. So then you end up with, I don't have to repeat them as separate things, I can just play it straight through. And that would give me an A minor 11 sound. So you can do all kinds of extended and altered sounds just by combining simple arpeggios together, so you don't have to memorize every possible arpeggio. And that's something he talks about quite a bit in here. So another thing, it all is determined, why does it sound like example he used, if you play a C major 7, it's going to sound like C major 7, but if you're playing it over top of a chord where a keyboard or guitarist is playing a D7, it's actually going to sound like a D13, because people are going to relate it back to that D7 and not hear it as that C major 7 by itself. The context really makes a difference. Even if you don't have a chord progression or a bass line going in the background, how you hear notes is determined by what came before and what comes after it. So this is my own explanation here, but if you look at, like, if I'm playing an A minor scale and I end on that E flat, that sounds discordant and it sounds like it creates tension. But now if you're end on that same one, but I'm going to play a different scale, and now it doesn't sound, if I'm here, it doesn't sound discordant. Why? Because I'm playing it in the context of the key of E flat. Even though I'm playing the same note, the context of how you hear it makes it sound discordant or not discordant. So even when we don't have chords in the background, if I play an arpeggio first, like I did here of the A minor, and then go into E minor 7, it sounds more like the A minor. So even if I do a bigger shape like here, which don't overlap so much. So that was A minor arpeggio, going to A minor 7 arpeggio, going to E minor, and I played that full E minor 7 arpeggio there. But especially if you had the A bass note going, but even without that, it kind of all sounds like it belongs together. And again, all these big examples, like those last two arpeggios I played, will be tapped out. And those ones were just my add-ins. Now I'm going to go ahead and show some of the stuff from the book. So I'm going to jump forward. I'm going to kind of jump back and forth from some of the basic stuff to the more complex stuff. Oh, so we talked about how you can create extensions. If you basically take like a C major and I add a triad or a seventh off each of the other notes in the chord, the other chord tones, like an E minor 7, that would add a 9. A G7 would add the 9 and 11. A B minor flat 5 would add the 9, 11, and 13. So you can get all those extensions just by moving up one note higher in the chord you're trying to, it's your primary chord they're trying to give the sound of. Now, a way to create some altered sounds, you have to go outside key to some extent. Would be, example he gives is if you have A7 and you take a melodic minor scale, which he also shows how to harmonize and find the chords and arpeggios, not just in your major minor scales, but in your harmonic minor and melodic minor scales. So if you, but right now let's just look at the scale without the arpeggios on. Melodic minor is basically like a major scale, but with a minor third. So if I play just a half step up, playing like an A flat melodic melodic minor, and I relate it back to this chord that's in the background, I'm creating all those alterations of, this would be in relation to G, a flat 9, sharp 9, the major third, flat 5, sharp 5, the flat 7, and then the root, and if I continue to note the flat 9 again. So it creates the sharp and flat 5s and 9s within that. Now if I don't want something quite that out there, I could play melodic minor on the 5th of the chord that I'm playing from, so the D note from the G. All of those notes except for the C sharp is inside the same key, so that would give you sound of a G13, but then this note is a sharp 11, so it'd be a G13 sharp 11 sound. And give some other examples of how you could do that too. And you can also create the sounds of some of the scales like diminished and whole tone and stuff by taking triads and combining them together. So for example, if I do a diminished scale just in a single octave, and this will be tabbed out at the bottom of the page, just it was kind of something I decided to add at the end, that's why it's down at the bottom. If I take those notes and I add a major arpeggio, usually with diminished you're thinking of the minors, but the major arpeggio fits inside there, and if I go up a minor third from where I started, and then again a minor third from the beginning of that one, I give the sound of that diminished while I'm really only playing stacked major triads stacked in minor in the flat third apart. Okay, so again he covers a lot of ways to create both extended and altered sounds. Here's something he talks about on using intervals, different, basically if you're counting through the notes of a scale. And excuse me, I did a video on intervals, which I'll link up in the corner. If you don't know that, you should get really comfortable with that. So what he's going to do here is I'm going to show some examples from the book again, where he's playing major 7 arpeggio, but not in your standard stacked thirds. Instead, so if I look at this, he's going to think of it as 2 intervals and then have a distance between them. So this is a major third, and then a 5th up from that root where I started, another major third. Okay. Usually you just think of it as stacked thirds, but thinking that way, now I can stack different intervals. I could stack a 5th and go a major third up, and stack a 5th, and see how it's kind of just reversing that. So the first one was thirds with a 5th apart, and now it's 5ths a third apart. So same thing, this would be an inversion in this case, but still a C major 7. I can do a major third and then go up a 4th to, again, still the same 4 notes of the major 7. And they could reverse that and go a 4th, and then up a major third from, again, where I started, to get those same notes in a different order. I could go back here, again, another inversion. I'm starting on a B note instead of the C. And I'm going to go up a flat 6, and then go a 4th higher, and do another flat 6. So flat 6, up a 4th, and then a flat 6. But I could also reverse that and go a 4th, and then go up a flat 6, and do another 4th. So those are some of the examples he shows, and then he goes into way more detail on some other options and compound intervals of, basically string skipping, or you could use either string skipping or hybrid picking to do them, and a bunch of licks and exercises. But again, different way to think of arpeggios. Rather than just stacked thirds, you take different intervals and you get those same notes, but with a different sound. So now let's go ahead and go into, the next exercise was back at the beginning of the book more, and it's just a very fundamental basic one of playing 4 notes in the arpeggio and then descending back 4 notes in the scale. So what this does is gets you really used to so that's how much I tabbed out in the book. He went all the way down through the scale. It gets you used to switching between, especially when you're doing something like a sweeping arpeggio, then that goes into your alternate or economy picking, so you need to get used to being able to smoothly transition between those, and it also gets used to where all the shapes are. Now, it sounds very much like exercise at that point, but it's a good fundamental. You could then take and reverse it, just read the tab backwards, and this is tabbed out also. And just do the scale first. But it's still exercise at that point. So to break it away from that exercise format, I would start improvising more. So if I just improvise, so this isn't tabbed out because I'm improvising. And just start moving between arpeggios. Wherever you end, you just play a scale, you play arpeggio and mix it up some. Now this next lick I'm going to show is one I wrote using that same idea. So I'm going to kind of alternate between scales and arpeggios. So this will be tabbed out. If I go through it slower, it's basically, I'm in the key of C major, I'm writing down the scale and reversing back up, playing a C major 7 arpeggio, then going to a G major, which could also be considered an inversion of this E minor 7 if you think of this as the root instead, but I'm going to just think of it as a G major. So D minor. Now this is a G major. I'm not going back to root, but I'm on the third of it. B minor flat 5. Now this is kind of what we talked about before. Even though I'm playing G into this B minor flat 5, it actually, the only note that's being added in is a 7, so it's going to give more of a G7 sound. And then I'm going to end on the root of the key, the C note. So that's that lick. So yeah, you know, to really get use out of these, you really have to make up your own your own licks and stuff from them. The next one I'm going to do, I'll go ahead and play that one that I did in the beginning, but slower so you can see what I'm doing. So like I said, it was basically taking minor arpeggios in the key and stacking them up. So I did an E minor to A minor to D minor, and that was the one from the book. And then one I didn't play in the beginning, that I'll play now, I did a variation where I'm using those same positions. And that, but made it a little bit more lick-like in my opinion. So basically on that, I'm still playing at E minor, but I don't go to 7th. Then I slide up into A minor, go into the D minor, then I switch to here. Now this is all just E minor 7 coming down. Okay, so that's that lick. And again, that's tabbed out too. And then the other one I did in the beginning, which was the variation 2 on that same idea, I started in the D minor. Just play through the full one, but then I switch into the E minor here. Slide up into A minor, slide up into D minor, slide up into the A minor again. Okay, so that's again another application of just taking those 3 minors and putting them together. I still had the same stack of order they did, but you won't have to. You can just, you know, you can deviate from the original exercise as much as you want, or start combining them together, add the arpeggios mixed with scale runs, mixed with intervals, different things. Another thing he talks about is what he calls speed or horizontal arpeggios, which are basically, I've got a whole series, which I'll link in the corner on these, in which I taught harmonize through the key, root position, first inversion, second inversion, and third inversion of them. So off each of the 4 notes. But basically what it is it's taking and moving the A minor 7, for example. That would be root position. Instead of keeping one position, shifting it forward. This isn't tabbed out because I say I have a whole series of videos teaching this, and then they would take maybe off the 7th, and you know, that would be that third inversion, major 7. So check out those, but he had a section on that, though he went a lot further than I went because he started adding some stuff like 11s and sharp 5s and other things. So maybe if you guys are interested, I'll do another video on those, doing some of the ones beyond just the regular 7s. Okay. Another lick that he did in here was basically, and this is actually the last lick in the book, it was stacking flat 5s. So it was over a 7 chord. A lot of these we'll kind of go over that dominant 7 chord because that's where you can create a lot of tension, because you're going to then oftentimes resolve it back to the major. Now keep in mind, a lot of this I would say is aimed more at jazz or jazz fusion players, so they have a lot of that mindset, but you can definitely play it in whatever genre you want, because while some of the licks might not translate into what you like to play, the ideas from the licks and the ideas from the exercise and the concepts, you create your own ideas from it, and there's just so many different ideas in this book. I originally, when I was starting to go through this, I was just putting bookmarks in these different sections, and again, it's a lot. Everything's tabbed out. You got good instructions and stuff too, along with a couple hundred exercises that are tabbed out. I started putting bookmarks in the areas I wanted to talk about. But then I got to almost like 20 bookmarks, because every couple pages there's something worthwhile in here. So anyways, this other lick I was going to show you. It's so this he was basically stacking flat 5s over the A7. So he's starting on the flat 7, and then when you stack the flat 5, that gives the flat 7 and the major 3rd. So if someone else was playing like the root, it would give that sound of that dominant 7. And then he just ends on the A7 arpeggio there. Now, because he's just doing it over the A7, he doesn't resolve it, so something I added in that wasn't part of it. If you want to, at the end, slide forward and get some resolution by adding the D major, because A7 would be in the key of D major, so then you could do something like that. Or you could just leave it hanging out on that last note. But it really kind of wants to resolve to a D, even more so than back to the root of the arpeggio you're playing, which would be the A. So if we kind of look at this, most of this was in the order I played it. I had those first ones where you're doing the A minor 11. I had the interval ones here, the ones talking about the mixing the scale and the arpeggios together, the 3 minors, the stacked flat 5s, and at the very end the idea of the diminished. And actually I don't think I did that yet, did I? The diminished are scale. If you do a diminished scale, you can then create that sound by using major arpeggios. If I already did this, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. So if I take a major and then go up a minor 3rd, and then go up minor 3rd from that, you can give the sound of that diminished by stacking major arpeggios a minor 3rd apart. You can also, and still give the diminished sound, stack minor arpeggios, triads, a 3rd apart, or even dominant 7 ones a 3rd apart. So there's tons of just tips like that that you could spend a whole chapter creating licks and stuff from, that he just, in some cases, spends like a page on or something. So check out the book. Again, Don Mach Arpeggio Alchemy. I'd recommend buying it. But otherwise, I've got probably coming on close to 50 videos on arpeggios. A couple dozen of them cover some of the same topics that are in here, along with some of my fundamental ones that cover like what chords are in a key, and some of those ideas, and how to determine what key a chord progression's in. I've also covered in videos. I will continue to cover other topics, including some from here. So if you guys are interested and you get the book and want to see my take on any of the sections, leave a comment on any of my arpeggio videos, and I'll try and make a video to go into more depth on something. Anyways, thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe, all that stuff, because that helps get me more views, so more people can see my content. Thanks.